We need to have some fun. Sing it, Michael. Come on, Michael. All right. That's I Want You Back by the Jackson 5. That's like even predates me pretty much. I was just a little kid when they came out. Anyways, that means I miss you guys already. And it's only Friday. Okay. So now that we talked about filtration, which is this side of the story, we started talking a little bit about what happens if you change urine output. How if we affect GFR, we can affect urine output. But there's another player here that I haven't really talked about. That's reabsorption. So remember I talked about some major processes happening in the kidneys, right? Or in the renal system. I said glomerular filtration. Boom, there it is. Somewhere on average around GFR is typically around 125 mLs a minute. That's the bulk, non-selective bulk movement of water and solutes from the plasma in the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule. 125 mLs a minute. Typically, our urine formation is somewhere around 1 ml per minute. So that means this process of reabsorption, tubular reabsorption, the active reclaiming, I said, think about that. I want you to use reclaiming, kind of, I want you back, right? That's what the body is saying to the water and the solutes that it needs. I want you back. And so this is happening, and water and solutes, then necessary water and solutes, move from the tubular components back into peritubular capillaries. Normally this occurs at a rate of around 124 mLs per minute. So why is that important? Well, what this means is that we can have very slight increases in glomerular filtration rate and very slight reductions in reabsorption. This can significantly impact the amount of urine, the rate of urine formation. We can also think if we reduce GFR or reduce reabsorption, we can also then have an impact on urine formation. All right, so we're going to come back to this concept when we get to the end of this section, but let's jump into the proximal convoluted tubule. This is a site of reabsorption. I want you back. Yo. All right, predominantly. So here's Bowman's capsule. Here is the proximal convoluted tubule. And typically here, all right, that's happening right in here. Proximal convoluted tubule. Right there. Is a site of obligatory reabsorption. And what I mean by that is that reabsorption in the proximal convoluted tubule occurs independently of the physiological need of the animal. Pretty much you're not going to, here in the proximal tubule, sodium and water reabsorption is not going to be adjusted according to your status. So how much of these so sodium is actively reabsorbed in the proximal tubule. This is important. We're going to see that this is going to require the utilization of ATP. And we're going to see that this active reabsorption of sodium is going to create an osmotic and a concentration gradient that is necessary to enable water and other solutes to be passively absorbed. So all of this reabsorption in the proximal tubule gets started through active transport of sodium. Now typically in the proximal tubule, 100% of all the glucose amino acids and vitamins that enter the proximal tubule are reabsorbed here. All the protein, any protein that happens to slip by all those layers of the glomerular membrane and enter into Bowman's capsule gets reabsorbed here. 70% of the sodium, chloride, potassium, and bicarbonate that enters Bowman's capsule is reabsorbed here in the proximal tubule, and about 70% of the water that enters Bowman's capsule is reabsorbed here in the proximal tubule. Everything that is not reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule are concentrated as the filtrate moves into the loop of Henle. Things like phenols and urea. Now this is going to be an important concept for you to hang on to also. So as we move on and we start talking about the proximal convoluted tubule, we're going to see that as ions move from one region to the next, this is going to start setting up both osmotic and concentration gradients, which can draw other ions or water from the lumen here in the proximal convoluted tubule out of that space and ultimately back into the peritubular capillaries. So let's start talking about this. All right? These are cells in the tubular lumen, or in the proximal convoluted tubule. The lumen is the space passing through the proximal convoluted tubule. Now these cells in the proximal convoluted tubule, they have two membrane spaces. There's the luminal membrane. This membrane faces the lumen, so the filtrate is moving through here. This is the basolateral membrane. The basolateral membrane faces the peritubular capillary. Right? So let's keep this orientation in our minds. Luminal membrane is closer to the tubular lumen. The basolateral membrane is facing the peritubular capillary. And then in between each of these cells in the proximal convoluted tubule, we have these lateral spaces, these lateral intercellular spaces. All right. So everything we're talking about, we're going to be talking about the process of reabsorption of sodium, potassium, chloride, and water. This is all going to happen according to what's called the standing gradient theory. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this process in a step-by-step manner. But remember, this is a dynamic process, so it's probably happening pretty much all at the same time, but I'm going to do it in a step-by-step manner to try to help you understand the reason why sodium, then water, then potassium, etc. moves from the filtrate in the tubular lumen, begins to move ultimately into the peritubular capillary. And here we have the peritubular capillary out here. So let me back this up for a second. Okay, good. So I'm going to chill. I'm going to stop this part of the video for right now. That's good background. Next video, we're going to get into actual reabsorption of sodium, potassium, chloride, and water here in the proximal convoluted tubule. Awesome.